Ladies, gentlemen, and barbarians of all ages, with my Whirlwind Dust Devil build complete, I felt it was the perfect time to try out a bash build myself with the changes going on with this in Season 4, and I've seen a number of different variations on this concept so far, but I've got something truly unique that sort of feels like the perfect middle ground for the common player. The bash build that can make you excel at every type of content that really matters, and yes, this isn't going to beat the highest barbarian pit runs that are currently happening, but I am comfortably doing a tier 101, and what reason is there really to push past that point, aside from the novelty of being able to say that you can. In the same build, I am speed farming nightmare dungeons, one-shotting every enemy, I'm doing Helltide, any activity in the game really, the damage worked into this is more than enough to just one-shot everything you see for those types of content. But then it's also tanky enough and consistent enough that it makes Torment Duriel and Endariel a cakewalk as well, and again, tier 101 just absolutely comfortable even with the Blood Bishop boss at the end of it then, which confirmed by Blizzard themselves is bugged to hit much harder than it should actually be doing to begin with. All that said, I'm using one uber unique for this footage, it should be said, which is what feels like the accepted norm now for a build guide, now that you can relatively easily get one guaranteed this season and beyond. But importantly, this build doesn't require this uber unique to function, because it is Tyrael's Might. This makes you tankier. Without this, your top pit clears will probably drop around 10 tiers, but nothing else will change really, and it will still function exactly the same. That said, it's hard not to mention that if you have it, this build is of course improved by Shaco, the Harlequin crest, as most builds do tend to be. That said, let's go over these skill points and where you want to put them, your technique slot of choice, your legendaries and uniques to perfect the build, and then the general stats and affixes that you need on your gear too, as well as what to aim for with tempering specifically as a system. Then we'll go over the Paragon board setup that I have and finish up with any tips that I have from playing this myself so far. Without further ado then, we are of course taking the full 5 ranks in bash. This is a bash build. I have extra ranks on my pants, but I could have far more extra ranks with far better rolls, better masterworking, and with the Harlequin crest as well, as mentioned earlier too. That said, only 8 ranks is what you see in the footage, so keep that in mind when considering how much this could scale with better gear. We also take its base enhancement, which gives us Fortify when hitting stunned enemies with bash, which is actually a major source of Fortify generation in general for us, at least on non-bosses. We don't take the other enhancements for this because we don't care about Fury generation, and we don't really care about the damage that our core skills are doing either, so those don't actually do anything to us, and it's actually better for us to save the skill point to use somewhere else. Then we're actually going to skip this cluster completely and move right on to the defensive cluster, and here we're going to be starting by taking Iron Skin, and also a couple of its enhancements here. This skill gives you a barrier for a percentage of your missing health, and as well as the other enhancements that we have, it also gives us a good chunk of Fortify every time that we use it, and we also have a legendary aspect on that makes it incredibly powerful defensively, giving it extra damage reduction, and also having it grant us unstoppable. So this is actually one of the prime defensive parts of this build as a whole. Then for our other active skill here, we're going to be grabbing Challenging Shout and its enhancement, but not the further enhancements. This will give us a taunt that also gives us damage reduction, and also gives us bonus maximum life while active. We don't take the other enhancements because we don't really care about Fury generation in this build at all, and we aren't scaling Thorns damage really, so the point is just better spent elsewhere for the build. Speaking of which, then we take some passives here as well. 3 ranks of Imposing Presence for bonus maximum life. I have even further bonus ranks right now as well from tempering on this. 3 ranks in Martial Vigor for bonus damage reduction from elite enemies, which is important as that does also include bosses of course. And then we also are going to be taking 1 rank in Outburst. I have again some bonus ranks in this just from gear, not from a proper temper, but from a mistake more than anything, and this is mostly just a gateway to let you get 1 rank of Tough as Nails, which increases your thorns, but more importantly makes it so 10% of your thorns is dealt as bleeding damage every time you do thorns damage, which does just activate all of your bleed effects every time that you take damage, which is just very effective. Past that, we move on to our Brawling cluster here, and we're going to be starting off with Kick. You only put 1 rank in here manually. I've got 4 ranks from my boots, which is actually quite good for this as they do lower the cooldown of it, and then we take its enhancement as well as Power Kick, altogether making it essentially a Fury spender for us. We have it for 2, maybe 3 main purposes: dumping mass amounts of Fury quickly, and reactivating Berserking to keep maximum uptime through a passive we're about to get. As well, on top of that, the third one, it applies Vulnerable for us, and is our main source of it for bosses, which is a neat bonus as well. Then we're going to be taking Warcry as well as an enhancement, and also Power Warcry, which increases your damage, more so when multiple enemies are around, and also activates Berserking to continue our uptime goals for that status. And you may notice the cooldown on this is relatively low here. That's due to tempering that I have done, and this is right around the right spot, honestly, where you can keep 100% uptime on Warcry with it in any dense combat situations, or on bosses as well, really. We also are going to be taking 3 ranks of the Booming Voice passive here for shout duration on our 2 shouts, 1 rank of Raid Leader for some healing for the duration of our shout uptime, which is quite nice too, and then 3 ranks of Guttural Yell for a damage reduction to your enemies when you use shouts. We then take 3 ranks of Aggressive Resistance over here for a damage reduction while we are berserking, Berserking, and then we're going to be taking 3 ranks of Battle Fervor for 3 seconds of Berserking when our kick damages an enemy. Then in the Weapon Master cluster, we're just going to be grabbing 3 ranks of Pit Fighter as a passive for bonus damage to close enemies, and also damage reduction from distant enemies too, and then we're going to be taking 1 rank of Thick Skin, mostly just as a gateway for 3 ranks of Counter Offensive, which gives us bonus damage when you have Fortify for at least 50% of your maximum life. Then moving on to the Ultimate cluster, here we are going to be taking Wrath of the Berserker as well as its enhancements. So hopefully the combo here is now sort of clear to see. We make a point of building up our Berserk damage multipliers through Wrath of the Berserker and its upgrades, and we have a number of ways to keep Berserking uptime on ourselves so that this damage buff snapshot is essentially active 100% of the time in a consistent and manageable way that doesn't really require any sort of RNG in our setup to make work and make stick. This extra influx of damage because of this lets us trade some of our other lesser damage sources for more survivability, and this just sort of balances the build out in a very nice spot as far as I'm concerned. We also grab a number of passives here, 3 ranks in heavy-handed here for a bonus critical multiplier with 2-handed weapons, which we are using, and I have bonus ranks here from my amulet as well. 3 ranks in Wallop for bonus damage with bludgeoning weapons to stunned or vulnerable enemies, and then 3 ranks of concussion to give us a lucky hit chance to stun enemies with bludgeoning weapons too. Then our final point is of course going to be in our key passive, which is going to be unconstrained for this build, as this is just increases to our damage gains while berserking. With that covered, then let's quickly touch on our technique slot. We mostly focus on critical damage in the build, but it is still important to have vulnerable multipliers too, as that's just another avenue to get more damage. So we're of course going to be taking the 2-handed axe technique for just a bonus vulnerable damage multiplier to balance things out a bit, and it's just the best way to add damage from this really in our current setup. Moving on past that, we've got the Legendaries and Uniques from this build, and you pretty much need the Pain Gorger's Gauntlets to make this function properly in non-boss content, as well Bash does cleave naturally in this build once you have your tempering set up. This just spreads that damage even further and faster through packs. If you don't have Tyraels, the chest as well that I was talking about earlier, the one that I recommend replacing it with is actually Rage of Harrowgath. Chance for cooldown reduction when applying bleed through our thorns mostly, but importantly this chest also comes with physical crit chance, which is great for us, and also a good chunk of damage reduction from bleeding enemies too, which is nice to have as a stat here. Aside from that, on your 2-handed weapons for double potency, you want the rapid aspect for bonus basic skill attack speed, and it's important to mention that this is like a separate multiplier to the standard attack speed stat, so even if you manage to reach 100% bonus attack speed, which is the cap of that affix, basic skill attack speed still builds even past that, so with better stats than mine, this won't lose any relevance. On your other 2-hander, you want the Moonrise aspect for bonus attack speed, as well as bonus damage with basic skills and movement speed, which is nice too. Then on your amulet for 50% bonus potency, we have the aspect of adaptability, which for the most part just increases our bass damage even further because we will mostly have our research bar full. For our other offensive aspects then, we have Edge Masters for bonus damage, the more full our research bar is, which I just mentioned will be constant. Inner Calm for a general damage increase multiplier, which then also triples when standing still. Mostly that only applies to bosses, but can also apply to groups of enemies in higher pit tiers with lots of health, just due to our survivability, which lets us stand still and activate the bonus. And then lastly, for those, we have the aspect of Elements for just rotating damage increases. When this is in the physical side of its buffs, it is a massive damage increase for us, and we can sort of just cycle through that as needed. Though for the most part, we are at our maximum damage consistently anyways outside of this. Then we of course have the Bold Chieftains aspect for cooldown reductions on our shouts depending on how many enemies are nearby when you cast them. And then our defensive aspects are going to be Iron Warrior, of course, which is actually quite important as that's what makes Iron Skin a really strong defensive skill for us. And you also want the aspect of Might down here, which for us is essentially just 20% constant damage reduction due to us just using a basic skill as our main damage source anyways. Then lastly, of course, on boots, we have the Hectic aspect for cooldown reductions for every few basic skill casts that we do, as we're going to be constantly casting basic skills and we do focus attack speed anyways. There are ways to play with this even further by using a dual wielding setup for your bash and the increased attack speed that you can get from that, but I found that the 2-handed version of this just synergizes quite a bit better together on the whole for at least what I was looking for regardless. As far as the actual stats that you want then, all of your weapons ideally will have strength, critical strike damage, and maximum life. For prioritizing your greater affixes, maximum life is specifically if you just need tankiness, otherwise critical damage above strength ideally. You want cooldown reduction on both your helmet and your amulet ideally as well. I have failed to roll cooldown reduction on this otherwise like perfect amulet for about 200 million gold at this stage. I've been working on it for days with no luck at all at this point, and I'm just accepting the too heavy-handed right now until I get a fresh drop because I don't want to spend more money on this. But aside from that, you do also want crit chance and attack speed on your amulet ideally, crit chance, attack speed, and then either strength or maximum life depending on your needs for your rings as well. You want ranks to bash, which are extremely important to get on your pants slot specifically. And personally, my solution to armor on Barbarian is my pants just having an armor roll with a tempering armor % increase on it too, which makes these surpass the armor cap by a fair bit, honestly, maybe a bit more than I need to, so I could rearrange some things a little bit, but first I need some stat changes. Honestly, things have gotten a bit confusing since tempering. Just know that your armor cap will shift and you'll have to adjust your build as that happens. For your pants though, you do want to prioritize greater affix bash if possible at all, and masterwork priority on bash as well for obvious reasons. On your boots, you want bonus ranks to kick, which are great because of the cooldown reduction that gives us, movement speed, and then a sort of flex slot for the third affix, something like strength or resistances, whatever fills the holes in your personal setup. On which note, let's talk about tempering. For your weapons, above all else, you want bash cleave damage from the Furious Weapon Temper Manual. This is our main damage scaling, and it gets nuts if you can masterwork it up multiple times, which I only have middling luck with, honestly, but it still does a hell of a lot of heavy lifting within this build. Then for your offensive tempers, and this applies to your entire build's offensive tempers, as this gets a bit complex here, you want damage with berserking until you hit the breakpoint of 300% increased damage in this stat. This will shift actively as you masterwork your gear, and then you can actually also manage it through your Paragon board a little bit. You'll see that I am at exactly 302%, and that is just because I have been very meticulous about managing this number, which is honestly sort of important to the whole setup and sort of balancing the way that your damage multipliers work. If you have that number where it should be, offensive slots should otherwise be dedicated to close enemy damage ideally, or if you happen to have a rogue, I have heard apparently you can send a weapon to your rogue and get them to slap on a critical strike damage offensive augment from the Marksman manual, which then scales with some of our multipliers much better. But again, that requires the investment of having a relatively up there rogue as well, as this has to be done on your own account, not through trading or anything like that. In all resource slot tempers, you want Warcry cooldown reduction. The goal is 100% uptime on Warcry. It's just pure damage increase in every scenario that it's up, and it also helps us keep up the snapshot buff from Wrath of the Berserker bonus at high uptime because of its Berserk application too. Then for your defensive slots, Challenging Shout cooldown reduction is great, of course, but more importantly, you want to use these to fix any holes in your gear. If you're lacking maximum life, you want to grab some ranks of Imposing Presence as a passive, things like that. If you're missing some elemental resistances, you want to fill that hole here. Though it's worth mentioning, fire and cold resistances are both easily grabbable in our Paragon path if you do need some more of those ones specifically. And then in utility, you just sort of want stun duration, honestly, more than anything else. Yeah, that does it for our gear then, so let's have a look at the Paragon board setup that we've got going on here. On your starting board, we grab the damage rare node on the right, but then we head up the left side of the board to get to the glyph socket itself, inside of which we're going to be sticking the exploit glyph for bonus damage to vulnerable enemies and vulnerable procs on first damage to enemies as well. We grab just enough dexterity in the radius to activate the glyph, and here I head up the left side, but if you have less armor, you might want to go up the right side through the rare armor node here. You'll have to consider your own stats for that. You want to exit off the board at the top then and stick on the Warbringer board like so. Then you want to head up and right to the glyph socket itself, inside of which you're going to be putting the territorial glyph. This gives you bonus damage to close enemies, as well as bonus damage reduction from close enemies once you activate the secondary effect. Here you're going to want to be grabbing all the rare and magic nodes of relevance as well. This also is where you can get a fair bit of extra all element resist, which is nice too. Then we're going to be heading out to the right side of this board and attaching on the Carnage board, which is a very important one for most builds with berserking, which of course we are. Then you want to head up and right through this to get to the glyph socket itself, inside of which we are putting the Ire glyph for bonus damage while berserking, as well as bonus damage reduction from elites while we are berserking too, which again is a constant goal of ours. From here you want to grab at least the amount that you need to activate the secondary effect of strength here, as well as the relevant rare and magic nodes, and then you can sort of start picking off of this down to the 40 out of 40 as your damage while berserking stat increases from other places, basically. This is one of the areas that you can use to manage that stat to keep it at that 300% threshold that we talked about before. After that, you want to head down and right over here to hook around to the legendary node of the board, which gives you bonus attack speed for every critical strike that you get while berserking, which again, both of those are goals for us, so that's just really good to have. Then you want to exit at the right side of the board through the damage while berserking rare and magic nodes, and then we're going to be attaching on the Decimator board here. Then you want to travel down and right to get to the glyph socket itself here, which we're going to be sticking in the Undaunted glyph. This gives you bonus damage while fortified, but also gives you bonus damage reduction for the more fortified that you have. And this is actually scaling. It doesn't just only apply while you are fortified, it is a scaling damage reduction, which is quite nice. Then we take the rare and magic nodes of note around here as well as enough willpower to actually power the glyph itself, and we move over to the legendary node for the board, which is Decimator, giving you a 10% bonus damage multiplier every time that you make an enemy vulnerable, and also giving you a bonus 10% damage multiplier if you can overpower a vulnerable enemy. We aren't focused around overpowers, but they do happen sometimes just randomly, so it's mostly just the initial multiplier, but it's still very good. After that, we're going to be back to the Carnage board, and here we're going to be heading out of the top side this time through the damage while World Berserking, Rare and Magic nodes once again, and this time we're going to be attaching on the Blood Rage board like so. You want to head up to the Magic and Rare nodes over here beside the glyph socket itself, inside of which we're going to be putting the Martial glyph. This gives a bonus to all magic nodes that are within range that is pretty sizable, honestly, and also the secondary effect of this makes it so anytime that you use a shout skill, you reduce the cooldown of your non-shouts by 2 seconds. This affects our Iron Skin, our Wrath of the Berserker, and our Kick, which is actually quite potent as a result, and it's quite good because it affects all of them at the same time. We then grab, of course, the actual strength to activate the glyph itself, as well as the Rare and Magic nodes of note on the top side so that we can wrap around to the legendary node of this board, which is Blood Rage, which gives us a chance to gain Berserking for 5 seconds every time we kill a bleeding enemy, but also gives us a damage increase multiplier just in general for 10% of our damage while berserking bonus, up to a maximum of a 30% multiplier. The current bonus is 30% because that is 10% of our 300% damage while berserking bonus, which is why that is the exact threshold you want to hit because this node now has a maximum. This legendary node did not used to have a maximum to this effect, which is why we used to really stack damage while berserking. Now it has a maximum, which means it's better to hunt multipliers elsewhere once you've reached this maximum. Then we want to get back additionally to the Carnage board one more time to head out the bottom side. While doing so, I actually stopped through the cold resistance rare magic nodes here. That fills a hole that is in my build specifically. You might not have the same hole. It sort of depends on your build, which resistances you'll be lacking where, but because I needed cold resistance, this was an easy place to stop. Then we head out of the bottom and we attach on the Hemorrhage board. After that, you want to head down and left to go through the rare and magic nodes to get to the glyph socket itself, inside of which we are putting the Might glyph for bonus effect to all magic nodes within range, as well as the secondary effect of an increased damage multiplier with two-handed weapons. We grab the strength to activate this, and we also grab the rare and magic nodes so that we actually get the effects from the glyph as well. And then we're going to be heading up one more time to attach one more board. This time from the Blood Rage board, we're going to be heading out of the right side to it to attach on the Flawless Technique board. From here, you want to head down and right to get to the glyph socket itself, inside of which we're going to be putting the Revenge glyph. This gives you a bonus to all rare nodes within range and a secondary bonus, which is a stacking damage multiplier every time that you deal thorns damage to an enemy. This mostly will apply to elites and bosses, but that's honestly what you need more damage for anyway, so it's still quite good. Then with our final points, we're just simply going to be grabbing the willpower to activate it, of course, and then the final rare and magic nodes in the area for bonus damage reduction from close enemies. If I could get just that little bit more willpower, which honestly I could trade some maximum life for if I wanted to, that would again be another 8% damage reduction, so there is again even further room for this to grow in general. And that pretty much does it for our actual setup of the build itself. So let's talk about actually playing the build. For anything like a nightmare dungeon or a pit run, things like that, or even a boss, really, it sort of starts the same way. You start by using Wrath of the Berserker and then using Kick when you are at maximum fury. Then you want to get back to maximum fury and use Kick again. Even if you don't have maximum fury bonuses, this means you will have spent 200 fury, which is the maximum that you can get bonuses from for Wrath of the Berserker. So you can use this and use Warcry for the damage boost afterwards to keep whacking away with Bash. Use Iron Skin before Challenging Shout, if possible, if you need to use defensive skills, because Challenging Shout will reduce Iron Skin's cooldown. And otherwise, just keep hitting Bash, Warcry on cooldown for the most part, and watch your Berserk timer above your ability bar to know if you need to throw out an extra kick to keep your bonuses from resetting. If you lose Berserk at any point, if the buff drops, you need to restart the process with Wrath of the Berserker from the top. Otherwise, other than that, bash away. That just about does it for today then, everyone. A sort of all-in-one, one-for-all bash build that I hope just appeals to most of you out there looking for something nice and strong to work towards that isn't overly technical or complex, and that doesn't need too much switching around for different content types either. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.